Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. In today's video I'm going to be doing a long overdue update of my London Marathon. I'm wearing the finished t-shirt, so obviously I have finished it. For anyone that doesn't follow me on social media, I'll leave a social media thing here, so if you're not following me then you can. But I did post on social media that I'd obviously finished the London Marathon. I haven't run since the London Marathon. I think I've run twice actually since the London Marathon, but other than that I've not really done anything. I am in full-blown post-marathon blues stage. I had entered the London Marathon again for next year, didn't get in unfortunately, and I'm not going through the charity route again just because it was really stressful. It's really hard to sort of fundraise for that, so I didn't feel like going through that again, so I won't be charity raising again. So I'm just going to have to hope that one day in the future I will get a ballot place. Otherwise I'm going to enter another marathon, but I want to have next year marathon free, if you will. So I'll do a marathon in 2024, but in 2023 I want to sort of focus on getting this weight off once and for all, because I have really been lacking on that. And just to generally improve my running fitness and things like that, I'm going to do a few half marathons, 10Ks, things like that throughout next year, and then I'll enter some marathon for 2024, whether that's that I get into London, I'm not sure, or whether I do some other marathon like Manchester or whatever. I'm not really sure at this point. But yeah, the reason why you came to the channel is because I'm doing my London Marathon recap. Maybe some people that have got into the London Marathon for next year will find this helpful for me to sort of talk about it. Just to give you a bit of a backstory, London Marathon was my first ever marathon. I'm not a long distance runner by any means. I don't generally like long distance running. Marathon training has been really hard for me. I have got a few videos that I've done in the past on my London Marathon training, but sort of towards the sort of peak times of my London Marathon training I didn't really do any race vlogs. I was just all consumed in marathon training, and it took up a lot of my time. I didn't realise that marathon training would take up so much time, but it does. The sort of long runs on the weekend, you sort of have to prepare in advance to not really do too much in the lead up to your long runs, and then on your long runs you just sort of zonked after you've done it. It takes a couple of hours for you to do your long runs as well, so yeah, sorry, I'm just getting a bit more comfortable. Yeah, so it took up a lot of my time. I guess in terms of the London Marathon recap, I'll start from a few days before, sort of in the lead up to the marathon, and then I'll talk about the marathon itself. So I had booked our hotel rooms way in advance, just because the prices as you get close to the marathon are ridiculous. Even when we paid for the hotel a couple of months in advance, it was like, I would say, half a year in advance, because Philip and his mum had already got a place before I even found out I'd got a charity space. So I'd booked the hotel, I think it was towards the beginning of the year. So I thought we got the hotel quite cheap, but London prices are quite expensive anyway, so it wasn't that cheap for the hotel. I'd booked it for the Saturday night and the Sunday night. The intention was to go home on the Monday so that we could fully just chill out in the hotel on the Sunday night. However, the rail strikes were announced about 2 weeks before London, so I had to book an extra night in the hotel that we were staying in, which was very expensive. It was, for the same price, the night that I had to book extra was the same price that we paid for like the 2 nights that we were staying there, so it was a very expensive stay in the hotel. So we travelled up on the Friday, travelling from Stamford to London King's Cross, and then obviously got to the hotel. That evening we got there pretty late, so we just sort of found a Frankie and Benny's to have food at, and then on the Saturday we went to the expo. So that was sort of when everything became very real for me. I think I was pretty chilled out the few days before, but as soon as I got to the expo I was just, the nerves started from there. The sort of check-in process to get the bag that you do for the bag drop and my bib was fairly straightforward. A lot of people had complained about the queues in the past, but I had no issues with that whatsoever. I think I was in the queue for like 5 minutes. So whether they've changed that process and made it easier, I'm not sure, but it was fairly straightforward for me and very quick. Even on Saturday, which was supposed to be like peak times for picking up your bibs and to sort of allow extra time, but we didn't need it. So yeah, the first time that I cried was at the sort of check-in desk picking up my bib, because that was literally very real to hold my bib knowing that I'd be doing the marathon the next day. Then we sort of walked around the expo. I don't think I didn't buy anything. I already had sort of my fuel and things like that. I hadn't forgotten anything, so I didn't need to pick anything up. I think the only extra thing that I picked up was a pair of OOFOS, which I was working with OOFOS on for a social media post. So they gave me a free pair of OOFOS. I already had my own, I already wear OOFOS, so it was nice to sort of get that extra thing from them. And I wore those post-marathon for like the way home and things like that. But yeah, other than that, I didn't really pick anything up. I guess if you need things, if you've run out of things, it's a good way to sort of stock up. But I didn't really find many sort of deals there or anything, so I didn't buy anything. I did do a couple of the photo opportunity things. So there was a section where you could take a photo with your bib next to like a 26.2 sign, so I did that. I'll insert pictures as I'm going along for bits and pieces that I am talking about on the way, so you will see those. So yeah, I took a picture near that sign. I found my name on the wall. They had a wall that had all of the participants' names. That was probably the longest thing in the entire expo that I had to do, was to find my name on this wall. Luckily I did find it, so I took a picture of that. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward, didn't stay there long. And then we made our way back to the hotel, and I'd sort of said to Philip and his mum that I didn't want to do much walking that day, just because we obviously had the marathon the next day. I didn't want to wear out my feet or my legs, but that ended up not being the case whatsoever. To stay in the hotel would have been silly all day, so we had to go out and do something, and that required walking because it was a bit more difficult to get to the places we wanted to get to on the tubes. So we ended up walking across Hyde Park to Harrods, and by the end of the day I think we'd done about 17k steps, which was way more than I wanted to, which obviously made me a bit nervous for the next day. Because it was my first marathon, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't want to have tired legs starting out for the race or anything like that, so I was really worried about that. My feet were aching towards the end of Saturday night, so I was really dreading what they were going to be like in the morning. Thankfully they were all right. I remember us having to look for somewhere to eat while we were near Harrods, so we went to this Italian place just because I didn't know how booked up everywhere was going to be, so we found the closest place and saw whether they were able to fit us in, which they were. So I ended up having pizza, which isn't my regular thing. Everyone usually says don't try anything new before race day or on race day, and I sort of didn't stick by that rule, but it was fine anyway. Pizza I've sometimes had before long runs and it's been fine. I usually go for pasta, but I just didn't fancy pasta that day, so I ended up going for a pizza. But yeah, it turned out fine. It was fine for the fuel that I needed for the next day. So I guess we'll move on to race day. So the previous night I had set up everything that we were going to be taking with us, so that we had piles of all our kit and everything else. I obviously took my flat lay the previous night of everything that I was going to be wearing for race day and uploaded that to my social media. So we had this sort of pile of clothes that we had for race day. And in the morning it sort of became a mad rush, because even though we'd already got all the stuff that we needed, I had to go through it again to make sure that I had everything that I needed. Philip's mum was waiting for us downstairs in reception. She kept incessantly calling us, which I was getting pretty annoyed about. But we ended up going down there a bit later than expected, but it was still going to be early enough for us to sort of do everything that we needed at the start area. We were going a bit earlier than we would have, or we were told to go. So we still had plenty of time. By the time I got down to reception, I realised I forgot both my water, which I needed to obviously keep hydrated before the race, and I forgot a hoodie to wear to obviously keep me warm before we started. You just sort of take a throwaway hoodie with you that you throw on the sort of race pen area, which they then pick through and donate things to charity and the homeless and things like that. So I had forgotten both of those things. So I had another meltdown in the reception of the hotel. I was crying, had to go back up to the room to go and get them and then come back down. And then we sort of started our journey to the start line. I had been told from like Facebook groups and things like that, that there would be a lot of runners going and travelling to the start line. So you should just like follow everyone else. But for some reason I felt like where we stayed near the sort of edge of Hyde Park, there was no other runners that I saw. I think there was two and they didn't really know where they were going, so I ended up being like the Pied Piper of a load of runners behind me that were all sort of following just one person, which ended up being me. It was a good job I had the City Mapper app. That's what I used to direct us to where we needed to go. I think there was 2 tube stops that we had. So there was a quick 2-minute walk to Lancaster Gate, which was not far from where we were staying for the hotel. And then we then had to end up at London Bridge. And then from London Bridge, Philip and his mum were in the Red Star area. So they had to go to Greenwich and I had to go to Blackheath because I was in the blue. So I got a bit upset at that point because I was literally going to be on my own from that point on. At least Philip had his mum to sort of settle his nerves. I would have liked Philip to have been there so he could at least like talk me off the edge, if you will, when I got a bit nervous. But the fact that they had to go just sort of sent me off the edge a bit. It was a good job there was another woman there who sort of took me under her wing and she was talking to me the whole time that we were getting to the start area, so thank you to her. I don't actually have her bib number or her name, so it's not like I could say thank you to her in person afterwards, but yeah, if she is watching this, thank you. And yeah, if you do ever watch this, message down below or message me on social media, let me know it was you. Getting to the start from London Bridge was fairly straightforward, didn't take very long. And then there was I would say a 10-ish minute walk from the station up to the start area. Start areas were really, it was well signposted where everything was. There was toilets on both the left hand and the right hand side. I didn't originally see the ones on the left hand side as you enter the area. So we went and gunned for the toilets on the right hand side. And then a marshal said that there was toilet because the queues on the right hand side were massive. And I thought we're going to be in these for ages and it's going to take us quite a while and it's going to be like very close to sort of starting time before we get through them. But a marshal had said that there was toilets also on the left hand side that no one was using, so we ended up going over there. And the queues were like non-existent there. We basically walked into a toilet. So I'd obviously had a pit stop at the toilet, which sort of got rid of some of my nerves because toilet and GI issues has been something that I've been suffering with during training, and I was just worried that I wouldn't have time to sort of go to the toilet because ideally I would have liked to have gone to the toilet, gone to the bag drop and then gone back to the toilet, which I did get to do, thankfully. So we went to the toilet. I lost the woman that I was originally walking with. I didn't see her again after that, so I was on my own at that point. I went to go and drop off my bag. I re-Vaselined up my feet just in case I needed any extra, and then dropped off my bag and then made my way towards the toilet / the start area. Went to the toilet again, so I was grateful that I'd gone twice before I was about to start the race, and then joined the wave area. I was in wave 15, which I think was one of the last ones to go. I think it was the second to last wave. I was aiming to finish around 6:15 for the race. So that's where it put me in my wave. I was in wave 15 for the blue start area, and that put me at a time of about 11:15 as a start time, which I was a bit nervous about because I usually do I had been doing all of my training runs very early in the morning to sort of avoid the heat during the summer. So I'd never sort of done a long run starting that late in the day because 11:15 is like nearly lunchtime for me. And I would have had my breakfast way earlier in the day, so I wasn't sure how that was going to pan out, but it ended up being fine. The sort of entrance to the wave area, people checked your numbers just to make sure that you were in the right area and that you weren't starting in blue when you had a red bib and things like that. So that was all straightforward, and it felt like it wasn't much time between entering the start area for the wave and actually starting the race, maybe 5 minutes of like slow walking to get to the start line, and then that was it. We were sort of going, and the nerves were in complete overdrive at that point. I remember shaking and my legs shaking for like at least the first mile. There was a big TV pylon not long after we started, which turns out to be a TV, it was a TV camera. So I was waving to all the cameras that I could see and things like that, all the photographers as I was going. I was just trying to generally just try and soak in all the atmosphere and enjoy the day rather than let the nerves and things like consume me. So I was trying to just pay attention to everything, soak in everything in. I was caught on the TV, so I will insert the clip of that. You can see me waving on the clip for that, so that was quite good. And then it just sort of became about being in the zone and just soaking everything in from that point. I won't talk about every single mile as I go on. I will leave my sort of stats here so you'll be able to see what was going on and what my times were for the different miles, but there wasn't anything to say, or there wasn't something to say about every single mile, so I'll only talk about the ones that stood out. So between 1 to 3, that was sort of a blur. I didn't really see anything. I think it was mostly residential streets. At the 3 mile mark / 5k was when the red waves and the blue waves sort of met and the course became one, because obviously when you start in different areas they had different roads and they all sort of met at the 3 mile mark. So I remember it becoming a bit more busier on the course at that point. I will say that the one thing that I didn't pay attention to right at the start of the race, and I only really sort of thought about right towards the end, was the blue line for the actual marathon distance marking. The blue line is where that's exactly marked for 26.2 miles for marathon distance. Anything outside of that line and you're sort of risking being over mileage, and I wasn't paying attention to that. And obviously with you weaving in front of people who are going slower than you, that can all add up to your distance. So whilst the marathon was 26.2, I think Strava registered mine at like 28.6. So whether I actually did 28.6, I'm not too sure. Maybe I did, just because I was not staying to that blue line at all right at the start. I picked up water from, I think, pretty much every water station, just so I could have a few sips, and it was quite warm on the day, so I remember I had a few sips and then whatever else I didn't have I sort of dumped over my head to keep me a bit cooler, because when I'm running anyway I do get quite hot, so that was a good strategy for me. The next point that I remember was the 6.5 miles. That was at Cutty, Sark. I will leave a sort of route map so you can see whereabouts I'm talking about on certain places, but it was Cutty, Sark at that point. And I don't remember seeing Cutty, Sark first. I remember hearing the noise, and that's quite a popular area for people to stand when they spectate. Is where the TV cameras and things like that are for like interviews during the race. So I definitely remember hearing the noise before I actually saw Cutty, Sark. And I just remember thinking, like, what on earth are we coming up to? Because I didn't know where we were on the course. I hadn't looked at any videos or anything like that in advance to sort of know where things were on the course. I just knew that water stops were like every mile or every 2 miles or whatever it was, and toilets were about the same. And that's all I was really sort of interested in. Anything else on the route I would see while I was there. So the atmosphere at Cutty, Sark was incredible. The noise was incredible. You couldn't help but smile as you was going past, even though there weren't people shouting for you. I had a little bib thing on my t-shirt that I stuck down to my vest, which had my name on it, and that was one of the best things that I've done. For anyone watching this that may be doing London, maybe it's your first time, make sure that you get your name on either your t-shirt or a bib. I'll leave the company that did the bibs that I was able to staple safety pin to my vest that I used for the day, because the amount of people that shout your name that you don't know, and it really helps, especially in the sort of really tougher parts of the race. So I definitely recommend that. I'll leave the company down below if anyone is interested in that. So yeah, that was Cutty, Sark. And then I don't remember much between Cutty, Sark and the first time that I stopped to walk. So the idea of the plan originally, when I discussed it in advance with Philip, was that I was going to run as much as I could until the point where I needed to stop for the first time, and then after that I was going to adopt some sort of like structured run walk method. I ended up not doing that. I didn't set it up on my watch before the race, so I didn't end up doing that, and it probably wouldn't have worked out for the best anyway. I just ran until I couldn't, or until I wanted a walk break, which ended up being around the 8.5 mile mark. And then after that I just sort of went with how I felt, so I would run as long as I could and then stop for a walk for a couple of minutes and then start again. So that ended up being what I did after the 8 mile mark. As you would see on Strava, everything sort of slowed down after I stopped for the first time, which is what happened in my training runs anyway. As soon as I stopped for the first time, I feel like that's it. Like, it's almost my body's sign to just adopt a run walk method, even though it's probably more than capable of running further. It just, yeah, something about stopping makes it harder to get going after that, and everything just slowed down after that point. Then around the 9-mile mark, my stomach was feeling a bit iffy, which was obviously not a great sign. I've mentioned before in the video that I had been struggling with some GI issues and things like that during training. So it was sort of my worst fear that I was going to need the toilet during the race. And I'd heard that the toilet queues and things like that were pretty long, and they'd add on quite a lot of time, which obviously as a slower runner anyway, it's not ideal to be adding on a load of extra time for toilet queues. But I did see a sort of row of toilets where there were no queues whatsoever, so I took advantage of that, obviously because my stomach wasn't feeling that great anyway. And when I went in there, I didn't need the toilet. I didn't even need the toilet for a wee. So that annoyed me a bit, because obviously I'd stopped for quite a long period of time, I would say a couple of minutes, which is not ideal when you're literally stationary. So when I came out of there, my legs were just, they were really heavy, and I regretted stopping, especially when I ended up not needing it, which is something that's happened in training as well, where I've had like a false alarm and my stomach's just been a bit iffy, and when I've stopped I've not actually needed anything. So I was a bit annoyed after that point. I tried to get going, my legs were a bit heavy, so that sort of became the point in the race where I really had to dig deep and like mentally get through it rather than physically, because I knew that my legs were physically capable of running much longer than that. But yeah, it just became a lot mentally tougher after that. I remember not long after that point, I tried to tag on to the Jeffing group, which I think was a 6:30 group. And I think they were running pretty short intervals. It felt like 30-30 or something like that. It did not feel like very long intervals at all. And I really couldn't get into it. I did the first, I would say like 6 to 8 sort of run walk intervals with them. But I felt like the running portion of the Jeffing intervals was quite fast paced for me, and it ended up throwing me off more, so I just decided to back off from that group and just do my own thing after that. I don't remember much of the next couple of miles. I think it was more sort of residential streets, nothing sort of spectacular to pinpoint. The next sort of marker for me was around 12 miles. That was coming up to nearly halfway, and it was Tower Bridge. Again, it was something that I heard before I saw. The streets were really, really busy around that point, and it was sort of a boost. My legs were not too bad at that point. I think I'd found my rhythm of getting into like a run walk method for me that worked for me, and my legs weren't feeling too bad, so I was fine. And it was sort of a mental checkpoint to get to nearly the halfway point and over Tower Bridge. I remember like crying or having tears on Tower Bridge, and I remember literally saying wow out loud as I was going over the sort of peak of Tower Bridge, and you're seeing all the crowds and all the people cheering and all that kind of stuff over Tower Bridge. That was just one of the highlights I think I've ever experienced. That was incredible. And then after you come off Tower Bridge, not long after that was like a two-way point. I think it was around, let me check my notes, I think it was around the 14-mile mark. Yeah, between 13 and 14 you can see runners coming the other way. I think they were on around mile 18 at that point. That was another really busy point. I remember solely being focused on whether I could see Philip and his mum on the other side, because when I took my walk breaks I would check the app to see whereabouts they were, and they were not long coming up to that point, so I didn't know whether I was going to be able to see them coming the other way and I'd be able to shout at them and get that little boost. There was a lot of like charity setup bits at that point as well, so a lot of like cheering and shouting people's names. I saw the Crohn's and colitis stand, I think a mile 16-ish, 15 or 16, so I did a little wave and a dance for them. So after the sort of two-way part, you sort of go around, I think it's the Docklands. I'm not too familiar with London, so I'm not too sure, but I know there was docks around that part and Canary Wharf, and a lot of like really big tall buildings, so you go around quite a lot of there's not a lot to see other than massive buildings, and that was a really, really lonely part of the course between, I'd say, the 15-mile mark and coming back the other way on the two-way part. That was quite a lonely part. Every time I stopped for a walk, I tried to talk to another runner that was walking just to sort of pass by the time, I guess, and try to sort of get out of my head with regards to my feet and my legs starting to tire and hurt. So I tried to sort of pass the time by making conversation with other people, which did work. And then at around the 18-mile mark, I thought, right, I'm going to call my dad, get a bit of a boost, and then I'll start again after that point. So I spoke to my dad. That was a bit emotional for me. I remember mostly listening to my dad talk and me just sort of soaking everything in, and occasionally whining about how my feet hurt. And he was telling me about how he was tracking me on the route, and obviously it was really emotional for me because I was running for Crohn's and colitis. I was running for my dad, so it was nice to hear his voice on the route. I didn't stay on the phone with him massively long because I didn't want to use it as an excuse to walk more than I needed to, so I sort of said, it was nice to hear your voice, I'm going to keep going now. So I put the phone down and I started running again. I think it was around, I would say, another mile and a half, so 19 and a half. I'd stopped for a walk, and someone that follows me on social media, she may or may not watch this, I'm not sure whether she watches YouTube, but she tapped me on the shoulder and obviously said that she follows me. I follow her as well, so I noticed her face straight away, and we walked together for quite a while. It was really sort of mentally and physically taxing at that point because I'd never been further than about 18 miles in training. Obviously it would have been ideal to go further than that in training, but that's just where my limit was in training. So anything sort of after 18 miles was sort of a PB in terms of distance for me. And I do remember walking probably more than I ran after that point. I was walking with this woman for quite a while, and I'd obviously mentioned that I felt like I needed the toilet and I was probably going to stop for the toilet and they should keep going. It was around the 19 and a half mile mark that I saw a set of toilets that had no queues, but I thought if I stop at this point, there's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to keep going, so I should probably just keep going as much as I can before I actually physically feel like I need the toilet. So I didn't go to those toilets, and it was almost instant regret after I'd passed it, because at the time I didn't feel like I urgently needed the toilet. I just felt a little stir in my stomach, so I was like, right, I'm going to keep going. And it was not long after that point where my stomach was really playing up, and I was like, I actually really should have stopped at those toilets, because I thought the toilets were meant to be every mile, and there didn't seem to be a toilet for what felt like miles. I think there was only probably about 2 miles in there, but it felt like forever at that point. And I think I remember at the 20-mile mark thinking I might have to pull out of the race because I desperately need the toilet and there just doesn't seem to be any. I mean, I know that they don't pack up the toilets or anything like that while people are still out on the course, but it felt like at that point there was missing toilets somewhere, or that I'd not seen them. It felt like I was walking forever, and it's not like I could run when I was busting for the toilet. So yeah, at that point I felt like there may be a very, very high chance that I might have to pull out of the race if I can't find a toilet, because there was just this sort of panicked moment where I felt like I was going to be this woman that shit herself on the course because I desperately needed the toilet that much. And I can't explain the relief. I remember on the way between the 19-mile point and I think it was the 21 was when I actually stopped. Between that point, I remember asking every marshal whether they knew if there was a toilet nearby, and I don't know whether they hadn't been sort of told any of that sort of thing beforehand, but no one knew where a toilet was from the point that I kept asking. And it was only until I saw the toilets at the 21 mile point that I had the biggest sense of relief I've ever felt in my life, because I knew at that point, as long as I went to the toilet, I'd be able to make it to the finish line. Whereas in between 19 and 21, without knowing if there was going to be a toilet stop, I literally thought, this is going to be my DNF. I'm not going to be able to finish the marathon if I don't find a toilet. So I got really sort of emotional at that point that I'd actually found a toilet to go in. And I remember being in the toilet and going to the toilet and being really dizzy. I literally felt like the toilets were swaying, but it was just me, because I hadn't had any water between that point because I didn't want to make the situation worse, sort of thing. And to fill myself up anymore, I didn't take any fuel from that point on because I didn't want to make anything worse. So I think that was the not having any water and not having any fuel during that point sort of had an adverse effect. And I was feeling really dizzy, and I remember coming out of the toilets after I'd finished and I could barely walk. Not because I was dizzy, just because my legs had seized up that much from being in the toilet that I couldn't run again after that point, which meant that I had to walk the last 5 miles, which is not a sort of proud point for me. It would have been ideal if I could have walked the rest, but physically I could not get my legs to move. I felt like even when I started to run, my groin started to hurt. I had mentioned in previous training videos that I'd had issues with my groin. If you're following me on social media, I mentioned it on there as well. During my, I think it was my 8 mile run, which was the week before London, I had a really painful groin, and I didn't know whether that was going to flare up at some point during the race, but it seemed to flare up during the last sort of couple of miles. So from 21 until just before the end, I walked the rest, and I just remember picking off all the other walkers on the sort of course. I tried to walk as fast as possible so to not add the time on and on and on, but obviously I knew that the 6/6:15 goal had completely gone out of the window at that point. And it just became about putting one foot in front of the other until I got to the finish line. Any sort of busy points on the course where there were more spectators just seemed to make me really emotional. And I just sort of had to hold on to those points where people were calling my name and things like that, just to sort of get me to the finish line. I think there was a photo near, I want to say Big Ben, where I looked really sort of emotional at that point, just because I'd seen other runners that were out on the course running to their families and things like that, and that made me really emotional as well. But yeah, it was a really sort of physical battle at that point to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, to not sort of let the groin issue get the better of me and things like that. And then we were on the sort of last portion of it. I don't know how long it was. It was probably the last 2 miles. After you pass Big Ben, for anyone, I mean, you might not know because you might not have done London Marathon before, but after you pass Big Ben and the Parliament houses, you sort of come on to the bit before the Mall. It might be the Mall, I'm not sure, but it's like a point that you walk towards Buckingham Palace and then you come back on yourself for the finish line. And I was just plodding along for that, and then I saw the sort of barriers, which are a bit confusing, and I have seen other people talk about it before as well, where they thought that those sort of barriers and the walkway that went over the top of the course was the finish line, which obviously it wasn't, because I knew where roughly the finish line was, but it looked similar. So that was a bit confusing. And then we turned the corner, and obviously because of the time that I was finishing at, which wasn't the 6:15 that I aimed for, there wasn't a lot of spectators around, out and about at that point. They'd already sort of been and gone. There were certain groups, and there were still obviously some spectators out there, but it was still quite a lonely part. Like, it would have been better if I'd have been quicker, because there would have been a lot more people about to cheer you for those final bits. Then as you sort of turn the corner and you see the finish line. I say see the finish line, but there was literally nothing on the I don't know how to explain it, the sort of gantry part that you run under for the finish line. There wasn't anything on that to say that it was the finish. And I follow someone on TikTok that actually didn't realise it was a finish, and she kept running. because there was nothing on there to say that it was the finish line. But I remember at that point in time, I just had to get to the finish. I was desperately wanting to get to the finish. And I remember just having this wave of energy where I just had to pick up my feet and at least try and run the last bit towards the finish. So that's what I did. And then I had finished London Marathon. So I stopped my watch and I burst out crying at that point. It was the relief of being done, of it being over, of not having a DNF from needing the toilet. The sheer relief of having completed it and all those months of training coming to an end. Yeah, even just now it's sort of, I've got a lump in my throat from thinking about that time. Yeah, so I'm really proud of finishing it, even though it wasn't in the time that I expected to finish in. I think I came in at just over 7 hours, which obviously isn't ideal. It's an hour extra than I had planned to be out on the course for. I'd obviously knew a rough sort of estimate of what time I was going to finish on based on my training training runs. But I also know from previous experience on other races that the adrenaline sort of kicks in and I end up running a bit faster than I would usually, which I thought would have been the case on London, but obviously it wasn't. The sort of toilet issues and things like that is something that I didn't expect. I had hoped to get through the whole race without needing the toilet, but to stop twice and then have my legs seize up both times wasn't ideal. So obviously coming in at over 7 hours wasn't the best, but I'm still proud of the whole journey that I went through from start to finish, right from the start of my first training run for the marathon right through to sort of getting to the finish line. I picked up my medal and then was trying to work out where I was going to meet Philip and his mum after the race. They sort of gave me really vague instructions, and even though I had walked part of the course, my legs instantly physically seized up after I finished, which was weird because I expected them to seize up way, way, way further back if I'd have been walking for most of that time. But it just seemed to come on straight after I finished, almost like the release and everything of actually crossing the finish line just allowed my whole body to relax. But I really physically seized up at that point and it was really hard to walk. It felt like forever before I got to the lorry that had my bag on it. And then Fred came to meet me, to take me to where everyone else was waiting. And I remember bursting out in tears when I saw him as well. I just remember being really emotional after that point. I think I was just really relieved that I'd finished, that I'd done it, that I was a marathoner and that I'd finished the London Marathon. Just feeling really proud of myself for having done it despite the struggles. So then I met Philip. Philip was really emotional, having seen me being really emotional over it. So he was crying, I was crying, it was all sort of a big mess. And then it was sort of like the hobble. Well, I had to change my shoes into my ethos, and then it was like the hobble back to the hotel. We had a couple of tube stops and things like that. It was really busy, but yeah, overall, one of the best experiences I've ever experienced in my life, despite it hurting and in fact, despite it being really uncomfortable in certain spots, despite me feeling like I wasn't going to finish the race at certain spots. I really enjoyed the whole experience. And I had said right after I finished, I think it was the person that was giving out the medals, she sort of said, "Are you going to enter it again?" And I was like, fuck no. I'm never doing that ever again. And I found out not long after that Philip had entered me into the ballot again, because I hadn't entered the ballot. The ballot was open a couple of days before the London Marathon race was going to start, and I hadn't entered. I was going to play it by ear on whether I wanted to actually do another one after that point, because I had said in my training videos as well that this was going to be my first and ever marathon. But I'd found out that Philip had entered me into the ballot, and I was really annoyed at that point. But a few days afterwards, when I'd sort of had the time to process things, I did feel like that sort of niggling feeling like I wanted to do another. So I was really sort of pleased that he had entered me into the London Marathon again. Obviously, I found out I didn't get in, which is, yeah, it sucked. Not gonna lie, it's been my 13th ballot entry and I still haven't got in. I feel like there needs to be a better weighted system for the people that haven't got in time after time. There used to be a system for it, and I get it, there's a lot of people that enter the London Marathon, but it just feels unfair that a lot of people get in time and time again, and then there's the people that don't, and people that have been entering for like 13 plus years and have never got in. That's probably sort of a bit of bitterness coming from me that I didn't get in again. Obviously there is the opportunity to take a charity space. However, having done a charity space this year, I know that that's not for me, and it was really difficult, if not more difficult, to raise all of that money. I think the sponsorship for charities for next year is still 2.5, nearly 3 grand for people to fundraise, and I just think that's a lot. It's a lot to ask for people to raise when we're going through what we're going through with the sort of cost of living and everything else. I just couldn't imagine having to try and raise those funds again, so it's just not for me. I've done it once. I'm really proud of the amount that I raised for Crohn's and colitis. I did have to chip in a bit at the end, but I did get the whole 2,500 that they wanted for my sort of pledge to them for the London Marathon. That's all paid, and that's all paid to the charity, so I'm really happy that that's going to go to a really good cause. But yeah, not for me. I'm not doing a charity entry ever again unless it's off my own back. So if I got into the London Marathon, I might raise money for charity just off my own back, but I'm never going to sort of pledge a 2,500 or whatever amount again. So yeah, I guess that's it for really the race recap. There was like I said, I generally had a really good time. It was really hard, I'm not gonna lie, but I really did enjoy the whole experience, and I really regret not getting my camera out more, or well, at all. I regret not getting it out at all during the race, because it would have been nice to sort of have those memories, but have them in my mind to physically relive. But yeah, I'm really proud of what I achieved, even though the time and things wasn't what I expected. I am not really bothered about that. At the end of the day, 26.2 miles in a marathon distance is a marathon, regardless of what time you do it in, so it doesn't matter to me. I guess I'll touch on this because at the time it was a difficult thing to have to experience, but I'd obviously mentioned my finishing, not finishing time, because I never mentioned that on social media. I wasn't really bothered about that. And I have said on my channel many times that I am not bothered about finishing times anyway. It's about the experience, it's about the atmosphere, and it's just about the sort of physical challenge for myself in doing the races. I'm not really bothered about times. So I never really had a full-scale time on what I wanted to do London in. I wasn't bothered as long as I finished. So I had put on social media that I'd finished. I put up a selfie, I'll show it here, of me with my medal. And the next day after that race, I had a lovely chap who commented something quite nasty on my picture. Basically saying that I should not lie to my followers about running a marathon if I walked most of it, which I didn't. I ran the first 8 miles and I walked after that, and I do admit, and I didn't make that secret, that I walked the last 5 or so miles of the marathon. But what does that matter to anyone else? I think he must have just been bitter about not getting into London, or I remember on his profile he was talking about himself being injured, so maybe he was a bit bitter about that, I'm not sure. But there was a lot of outpouring of love after that, because I posted it on my stories and I got a lot of support out of that. And it just sort of reiterates the point, and I want to make that point to anyone that is watching this that is maybe afraid of doing the London Marathon because they're a back of the pack runner, maybe they're not as fast as everyone else. It does not matter what time you do the London Marathon is. It is your race to run however you want, whether you walk it all, because there was a walker, I think she had a 7:15 flag on her back, who was literally walking the whole thing at quite a fast pace. It does not matter how you run the London Marathon. They have a, I think it's a cut-off point of about 8 hours after the last runner crosses the start line, which gives you probably 9-10 hours to get to the finish line. And even after that, they do not take the finish down. They still give people out medals after that point. There are people that are disabled, that have different abilities, that do the London Marathon in all sorts of times. So it does not matter what time you do the London Marathon in, and it shouldn't matter to anyone else but you what time you do the London Marathon in. This guy had physically gone to the London Marathon page and searched my name, because there was nowhere on social media that I mentioned my time. I wasn't interested in my time, so I didn't feel the need to put it on social media. But yeah, I guess that's the sort of beauty or the downside to social media, is that you're always going to get those sort of negative people that have something to say. But yeah, that was just sort of a rubbish thing to have the day after, whilst I was on my sort of runner's high after finishing the marathon. Luckily, I'm thick-skinned when it comes to things like that. I'm not too bothered about it. I didn't let it affect me, and I just sort of moved on. But yeah, for other people, that would have really, really, really knocked them. So all I would say is, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And yeah, as I said before, the marathon is there to run at your pace. However you want to run your run or walk your race, to it however you want. So just don't pay attention to the sort of horrible people that are on the internet. But yeah, I guess that's it. I've talked my face off for 45 minutes, so I will have different parts that people can click through, so they can go to whatever part they want. But yeah, I just wanted to document it just for my own sort of benefit, really. And if anyone wanted to listen for 45 minutes, then that's great. If you're still here, then yeah, thank you for listening and coming along on my story for the marathon. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to really say on the marathon itself. Yeah, it would have been nice to be able to do it again and experience it again. Had I had the opportunity to do London again, I will definitely film it this time, because I sort of know what to expect this time round. I hopefully won't be as nervous. But yeah, there is another marathon in my future. It's not going to be the first and only like I thought, but it just won't be next year. I don't think it'll be the year after, just because I want to sort of get back on the weight loss train, get this weight off, and sort of, yeah, try and get my running fitness and things like that back with some half marathons, and then I'll dabble back into marathons in 2024. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to go and get a drink now because my mouth is getting very dry. That's it. That's all I've got to say. I hope you enjoyed seeing photos and things like that. And I guess I'll see you in my next video, which will either be a run vlog from when I went to Scotland, because I have 2 of those that I have planned that I need to edit and post. So it'll either be those, or it'll be my check-in, whichever one will come first. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You can always click the notification bell down below to be notified of when my videos go live. Other than that, hope you're all staying safe and well. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend, whenever it is that you're watching this, and I will see you again in my next video.